Hello, everyone. Thank you for watching The Naturalist Capitalist. I'm your host, Reed Coverdale, and I've got Eric Brakey on the show today. How's it going, Eric?
Hey, Reed. Going pretty well. Happy to be with you.
Yeah, thanks for joining me. This is your first time ever coming on my show, so why don't you just give us a little bit of information on who you are, what you've been doing in politics the last decade plus. What's your mission? What are you trying to get accomplished?
Yeah, well, my name's Eric Brakey. I'm just a grassroots Ron Paul liberty activist who's been doing this for about 10 years, and I've had a pretty wild ride. I started off just, you know, showing up to Ron Paul debate watch parties in New York City or with a grassroots group there, started volunteering. That led to a job with the Ron Paul campaign in 2012. I became the state director of Maine, which was one of the few states that we won. We actually had a big showdown with the Mitt Romney campaign and the Republican National Committee on the floor of the National Convention. A bunch of us, myself included, were kicked out as delegates, which led to all kinds of protests and rioting. That's a nice piece of liberty history right there. But after the presidential campaign ended and Ron announced that he was retiring from Congress, and he kind of passed the torch of liberty on to all of us, I figured it was, my responsibility to do what I could, and I figured it was all of our responsibilities to do what we could to try to keep pushing that forward. And I know so many people have in so many different ways. There's not, one path, but the path that I went down was I decided to help elect liberty-minded people, Ron Paul supporters, to the state legislature in Maine. I collaborated with some other grassroots activists. We supported some good people. We had mixed results, in 2012. Got a few people reelected, no new people elected. But then 2 years later, I ran for the state Senate in my state. It was actually a race that was supposedly not a winnable race. I ran against a guy who'd been in elected office as a Democrat in the area for 36 consecutive years. Keep in mind, I was 26 at the time, so he'd been elected office 10 years longer than I'd been alive. He'd never lost a race. He'd been the city council, mayor of the largest city in the district. He'd been the register of probate for 10 years. He'd been in the state Senate for 10 years. And I was a 26-year-old Ron Paul activist nobody had ever heard of. But with the support of the Liberty Movement and grassroots fundraising, we broke state fundraising records. I went out and I knocked on 8,000 doors, talking directly with voters about how the answers to the problems that we face, from a broken welfare system to taxes that were destroying jobs to so many of the problems that we face. The answer was not more government, but more liberty, shrinking government and finding liberty-based solutions. I ended up winning that race in what was one of the biggest surprise upsets in my state that year in 2014. Defeated this incumbent almost by 20 points. Nobody kind of saw that coming, not even myself. But that was the beginning of a wild ride. I served 2 terms in the state Senate. Served as the Senate chairman for the Health and Human Services Committee. I organized a huge grassroots effort with thousands of gun rights activists to pass constitutional carry in the state of Maine. We became the 6th state in the country with a constitutional carry state. 6 years later now, that number's up to 18. I helped pass some significant welfare reforms, expanded our state's medical cannabis program on free market principles. I passed a right to try law, so terminally ill patients don't have to beg for permission from the federal government to try experimental medications that could save their lives. And I even helped a bunch of 6th grade students legalize hedgehogs as pets, which is one of the less remarked upon victories, but one of my personal favorites, because when you have young people asking for more freedom, I figure that's something that needs to be encouraged and supported. But I served 2 terms there in the state Senate. During that time, I also had the opportunity to represent my state on the Republican National Platform Committee. got planks into the national platform for the Republican Party to, audit the Pentagon and support right to try laws, and several liberty planks we got in. Some others we didn't get in, like calling for an end to some of the wars. But I ran for, in 2018, I left the state Senate behind. I ran for the United States Senate. And I won the Republican nomination for the US Senate. I went up against a very entrenched incumbent named Angus King, performed stronger against him than anyone thought possible, but you kind of can see the results. I'm not a US Senator today. But then I ran for the US Congress in 2020. Ran for the Republican nomination, a very winnable seat. Things were looking very good until the neocons dropped $500,000 against me, calling me a never Trumper because of things I had said while I was supporting Rand Paul as his state chairman in 2016. Ironically, I was far more supportive of Trump than they were, at least as far as his express foreign policy goes, trying to end the wars. Anyway, that's kind of a bit of a long story, everything there together. But now I'm working with Young Americans for Liberty, which is, I think, one of the, I think the most pivotal institution in the liberty movement right now, as far as actively working on strategy to make liberty win in our times. What Young Americans for Liberty is doing, and I work for Young Americans for Liberty as a policy analyst, and working with state legislators that we've helped elect across the country, is that we identify liberty activists who are ready to run for the state legislature, and we kind of take that Eric Brakey model. We run people for the state legislatures. And we deploy our kind of army of liberty activists, college students, to go knock doors to help get them elected. This model has worked amazingly over the last 2 cycles that this strategy has been working. When I was in the state Senate, there were maybe, by a generous count, 10 Ron Paul state legislators in the country. Today, we have 178, and that number continues to grow, including in New Hampshire, where a majority of the Republicans in the House are liberty activists. And Republicans control the legislature there. So Ron Paul liberty supporters are the majority of the majority, and we've never seen anything like this before. This is a very, very interesting times, and I know that people get discouraged when they see all the races for federal office that have been attempted over the years, and we've got very little to show for it except for Rand Paul in the U.S. Senate, Thomas Massie in Congress, maybe a few other folks you could count, but I've come to believe very much so the path to making liberty win in our times, in our generation, is going after the state legislatures in our country. And I'm really proud to have helped kind of build a model of how that's possible. And I'm especially glad now to be helping others who are trying to follow that model.
Yeah, so there's 2 things I really want to talk about in this conversation with you. One is the Republican Party versus the Libertarian Party, but the other thing is what you were just alluding to, which is going after state legislatures, because I feel that, let's talk about that first, because I feel that everybody is already talking about who's going to run for president in 2024 and save us from this mess. That a bunch of libertarians are talking that way too, whether they want Justin Amash or Dave Smith or whoever it is to run. They're envisioning somebody swooping in to the Oval Office and just fixing everything, just as easily as we destroyed everything. And I think, I worked on Tulsi Gabbard's campaign in 2020. And I remember toward the end, before she dropped out, I was just thinking like, okay, what am I picturing if she somehow were able to win this? What type of cabinet is she going to be allowed to assemble? And then what type of things is she actually going to be allowed to get done? Because we've got such a monster in Washington that we'd be taking on, that the president, him or herself, really doesn't have that much power over changing. And, after she dropped out, and then I got involved in the Libertarian campaign for Joe Jorgensen and for a bunch of races around the country. I don't know. I just really thinking about that idea that you can have one administration just turn things around so drastically, or by just getting a few people into federal office, that you can shake this monster that we've been building for decades and just destroy it from the top down, is a complete fallacy. I mean, it's impossible. So do you want to talk about why it really matters that we go after the state legislatures versus the presidency, or even, as you've said, federal positions in Congress and the Senate?
Yeah. Well, I don't want to completely discount the idea of folks, having a champion run for the White House every time the opportunity comes up. But we should recognize that the value of that is, certainly there would be great value if that person actually got elected, and but even Ron Paul acknowledged, if he had managed to win the presidency, which I maintain was very much possible, especially in 2012, if things had gone a little differently. If Iowa had worked out, he'd peaked at a different time. If things could have worked out, and we could have been in a different world today. But even if he had succeeded in that, even those things on paper, that in the Constitution it says that the president has like the unilateral authority to do, like bring the troops home. I think we've seen how much blocking and tackling there is to prevent presidents from even exercising those powers if they're so inclined. Now, Trump certainly was no perfect president, and he was no vanguard of libertarianism by any stretch of the imagination. But he did have some good instincts on occasion in terms of wanting to end the wars. And anytime he tried to, the whole kind, or even if it wasn't even an honest attempt, even anytime he verbally expressed the desire to, you saw the whole kind of the what Michael Malice would call the cathedral, this kind of this collusion of powers between unelected government bureaucracies and the corporate media, and just the whole Washington D.C. complex just turn against him and do everything they could to box him in and stop him from being able to take any action like that. So I would be very disappointed if we didn't have someone, a real liberty champion in the Ron Paul mold, running for president in 2024. I think the best path to do that is in the Republican Party, but we can talk about that later.
Mm-hmm.
But ultimately, the value of that is primarily, getting the message out and waking people up and bringing people into the movement. After all, I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for Ron Paul running for president in 2012 and in 2008. And I know so many other people have that story. But as far as achieving kind of real change, if we could get the best person in the world elected president, but if the whole system from the top to the bottom, outside of that one office of the president, is aligned against that person and the liberty agenda, then they're not going to make much progress. So I very much maintain the best thing that we can be doing, as far as regular average Joes who want to make a difference, is run for your local state legislature. And if you can't run for your local state legislature, support people who can. And the value of this is twofold. One, they're races that we can win. I was nobody when I ran. I was nobody special. I'd never run for office before. I didn't have family connections. I didn't have any of the things that like you typically look for in someone you would think is electable. In fact, the establishment of the Republican Party thought I was incredibly unelectable, and that's why they tried to recruit people to run against me in the primary. And only with the support of the Liberty Movement were we able to fend off challengers. And it turns out they were wrong, because I think there's something valuable in the liberty message itself that can build broad coalitions of Republicans and Democrats and independents to vote for someone regardless of their party. So there's that. But the other value in getting people elected to state legislature, beyond just the fact that we can, is the fact that you can make actual practical differences in people's lives by applying the principles of liberty. You can, as I was able to do, you can advance and pass liberty policy, like I was able to do with constitutional carry and welfare reform and right to try, and legalized hedgehogs and medical marijuana. Um, and some of those are maybe more significant than others, but they make a real difference in kind of combating state level tyranny, and in some cases federal level tyranny. The more people we get elected to the state legislatures, it's not just the state level tyrannies we can fight against, but frankly, when we're concerned about federal tyranny, it's becoming increasingly clear to me that a state legislative strategy is far more effective than a congressional strategy. Even if we manage to get past the establishment watchdogs guarding all of these federal races, these seats of power in Washington, D.C., the average congressman today has almost no power to change policy. You can't even sponsor an amendment on a bill as a congressman unless Nancy Pelosi signs off on it. But from the state capitals, we can sponsor and pass things like I was able to do with right to try, nullifying the FDA as far as people being able to have access to investigational medicines. We've got people sponsoring the Second Amendment Preservation Act to nullify unconstitutional gun laws. We can even fight back against things that we really have not typically thought of as the domain of the states. We can fight back against the foreign policy, the never-ending wars. As across the country, liberty legislators are sponsoring the Defend the Guard Act, basically, asserting the state power over the National Guard, saying that Washington, D.C. is not going to send our men and women in uniform in the National Guard off to fight a third decade of undeclared war in the Middle East. If we actually are at war, Congress better declare it and give our troops a clear mission. And these are ways that we as regular people, as Washington, D.C. has grown so distant and so unaccountable to us, through the states, we can really fight back. And I will say, anyone who's really interested in this strategy, there's no book I would recommend more than Tom Wood's book, Nullification, which really kind of just outlines the philosophy of James Madison and Thomas Jefferson, and the responsibility of the states to nullify unconstitutional uses of powers, and how that can be applied to the modern age that we live.
Yeah. So before we get into the Republican Party versus the Libertarian Party, I wanted to bring up the fact that I do agree with you that it's important to run someone for president, whether it's in the Republican Party or the Libertarian Party, who does amplify that message of liberty, just to bring attention to it, because you're trying to do that over hundreds of races or whatever is kind of hard. But if you can run someone who's really driving that message home, it draws attention to what's going on. So to me, it's kind of ironic. Ron Paul wasn't really running to win in my mind. He was running to get a message out, where Rand Paul was actually running to win. Like, in his mind, the way he set up his run was, I can actually win this. And Ron Paul did so much better than Rand Paul did, because Rand Paul was trying to pander more to the Republican Party, sound a little less unhinged or whatever, or more centralized to the GOP platform, where his dad was just telling it how it was. There was no filter, wasn't holding anything back, straight up said in the debate in South Carolina that we should just legalize heroin, things like that no other Republican had ever said before. So I guess my question there is, do you think it's better to run on a pure message than to try to win if we have somebody who is going to run either in the Republican Party or the Libertarian Party? Is it more important that they have a crisp and loud libertarian message than it is that they're trying to actually win the nomination?
I would say, I wish I could say there was like a clear, easy rule to say one is better than the other. I think, if we look at the, those two particular examples, I would say, yeah, Ron's campaigns for president were more successful in that both Ron and Rand failed to win the Republican nomination, but Ron's runs campaigns for president, I think will have a much more long-term impact on history in terms of the folks that he brought to the movement. Though, to be fair to Rand, I also know a lot of young people. I mean, a lot of young people who came to the Liberty Movement because of Rand Paul's campaign for president. So there was still value. There was still a lot of value in Rand doing what he did. I know some of the best liberty activists I know today are in the movement because of Rand's campaign for president. I also know, believe it or not, people who are great liberty activists in the movement who are here because of Gary Johnson's campaign for president. So even somehow Gary Johnson, and I shouldn't be mean to Gary Johnson. Gary's been a real gentleman to me over the years, and I have a lot of respect for him. But I do think even more than kind of what we can critique about Rand's run for president in 2016, I think Gary Johnson's campaign kind of took a lot of those, maybe what we'd say is the same mistakes, and kind of doubled down on that even more. But even there, the value of Gary Johnson running, brought people into the movement. I'm sure Joe Jorgensen will, as we go on, there'll be great activists in the movement who are doing great things that we'll get to know over the next couple of years who say, oh, I'm here because of George Jorgensen. So I think that there is value. There's value in folks running. There's value in folks running. But ultimately, yeah, I think that if the goal is beyond just trying to win the election here and now, if the goal is, to try to have the biggest longstanding impact and waking the most people up, then yeah, you should really try to use that moment, that platform, to kind of deliver the message in as pure a form as possible, but also in a form that is, people are ready to hear. You got to meet people where they are as well.
Yeah. So yeah, let's talk about the GOP. So I used to be a Republican. I was brought up in a very conservative household, and Rand Paul actually did bring me into the Liberty Movement. I'll admit that. Ron Paul was running when I was a senior in high school in 2012, and he started kind of pulling at my conscience. But Rand Paul, I really started paying attention to him in 2014 when he filibustered John Brennan's nomination. That was like the first thing I knew about him. And yeah, I was really excited for his campaign. And that's why it actually hurt so much that it didn't go anywhere, because I was really excited for him. But I left the Republican Party. I didn't unregister until 2018, but in 2016, after how everything went, I just realized that, maybe the Republican Party never actually stood for what I believe in, because, a lot of people, and I'm guilty of saying this too, that it's changed and now they don't care about fiscal responsibility, whereas they used to. And I'm like, okay, when did they used to? Under George Bush, under Ronald Reagan? Like, when did they, when were they ever having really balanced budgets? I don't think they ever really were. It was just this idea that this is what the Republican Party is supposed to be, and it's not. I've realized that's more what it is, that we have an idea of what it's supposed to represent, and it doesn't. It's not really that it used to, and now it doesn't anymore. But I watched both of your debates with Dave Smith, the one with just you guys, and then the one with Dave Rubin. And it seemed like the conversation just kept going back to Trump. And so I want to talk about like the actual Republicans throughout the country, because as you've said, the Republican Party is just like a vehicle, right? It's just a shell that you fill with the right people. But in my mind, it's already full of a lot of people who don't really believe the same things we do. I'm actually from New Hampshire. I live in Utah now, but I moved last year. And you were saying that there are a lot of Ron Paul style liberty advocates there. But, as I said, Ron Paul told Republicans in South Carolina that we should legalize heroin. That's who Ron Paul is. But in New Hampshire, we don't even have legal cannabis yet. We passed red flag laws the last year I was there, like in the I think in January or February of 2020, yeah. The House and Senate.
When Democrats were in charge.
Yeah, but Republicans crossed over and voted too.
Like I'm sure there were some, and yeah, they need to be drummed out of office.
But yeah. And we have like the highest property taxes and all sorts of crap. So I'm just not convinced that who you are calling Ron Paul style Republicans are actually Ron Paul style Republicans. I mean, are they really as stalwart in the message and believe in liberty as much as Ron Paul does?
Well, there's always going to be a range. I mean, whenever we are, you know, when you're working in politics, you have to build coalitions, right? You know, because there's only one true libertarian. It's Eric Brakey. Everyone else is a poser and a fake, right? Or
Yeah.
that's the problem we always run into, is everyone thinks that they're the only one. I um, there was a guy in New Hampshire who was saying, you say that the Republican majority leader is a Ron Paul Liberty guy, but you're a liar because he supports the death penalty. And it's like, all right, well, I don't support the death penalty. I think the death penalty is a statist institution that should be abolished. I don't think that that's something we should support. But if we're really going to demand that everyone agree with us 100% on everything, every issue, you're going to find it's a very, very lonely battle, and you're going to be standing alone.
Right.
Now, of course, people disagree with me. I want to do what I can to persuade them, but frankly, there's a lot of people, in the liberty movement, there are a whole host of views on a whole host of issues. We can't agree on abortion. We can't agree on intellectual property. There are things that
Right.
we can stand around and fight all day on and not work with each other, or we can recognize that we agree for the most part on the fundamental underlying principles of liberty and the non-aggression principle, and perhaps we just disagree on how it's applied in certain cases, and we can build on that. But the fact is, New Hampshire right now, the Liberty Freedom Caucus in New Hampshire is leading the charge to make New Hampshire the first right to work state in the country. In the past, these folks led the charge to make it a constitutional carry state. They are right now fighting to hold the Republican governor accountable and to end the lockdown order. So they're going against the governor of their own party, which is a very, very politically difficult thing to do. You got to have real moral fortitude to do that, and these folks are doing it, which is incredibly commendable. And so, yeah, I mean, I think, I'm sorry. I feels like maybe you left New Hampshire just like a year too soon or so,
Maybe.
because this kind of liberty takeover just happened this past November. It's been like 3 months since this happened, and we're just starting to see the fruits of that. So we'll see kind of in the long run what's happening there. Of course, my home is in Maine. And so I'm a little jealous of New Hampshire across the border and the things that are starting to happen there. I'm hoping that it'll rub off a little bit. But we've got some great liberty champions elected in Maine, and I think of, just give you an example of what I'm talking about as far as as far as some of our great kind of liberty legislators. We have Heidi Sampson, who's a state representative in Maine, who's sponsoring the Defend the Guard Act, which I already talked about. She's the mother of her son is in the National Guard, and she's seen firsthand kind of how our troops are being abused, and she's sponsoring real legislation to bring the troops home from the state level. We have a gentleman in Iowa who is sponsoring legislation to decriminalize psilocybin. As a Republican state legislator in Iowa, is leading the charge to decriminalize psilocybin. Like that's about as cutting edge liberty as perhaps you get in elected politics these days. So our folks in kind of our Hazlitt coalition are kind of shifting the Overton window in terms of what is, what the conservative movement, what the liberty movement can demand and push for in state level politics.
Yeah, well, my whole family still lives in New Hampshire, and I'm very familiar with what happens there. So I'll have to, I'll just have to watch, and I guess we'll see what happens over the next year or so.
Keep watching.
Yeah, I will. So I just wanted to talk about like the entire Republican movement in general. Something that really scared me was when Trump airstriked Soleimani about a year ago.
Yeah.
So first of all, it was terrifying that he did that, but the response from the Republican base was pretty much 100% approval. And I even, when Rand Paul was kind of speaking out against it, a lot of my friends were calling him a traitor, that he was stabbing Trump in the back. People were just
So it wasn't 100% approval because
okay.
Rand Paul,
Yeah,
Rand Paul
except
at
for
least.
Rand Paul, but like pretty much every
Yeah.
Republican friend, every voter I knew was 100% behind it, even though like a week earlier they had been agreeing with the sentiment of, oh yeah, we need to, the end of the war thing on the Republican side seems to kind of be a platitude statement. Once the rubber hits the road, if anything happens or someone does anything that we don't like, if a Republican decides, hey, we need to go bomb them, then they all seem happy. But I want to talk about some other issues too, like Pete Ricketts in Nebraska, the governor of Nebraska, and the video came out, I think yesterday, of him saying that if you want to legalize marijuana, then you want your kids to die. And then Kristi Noem in South Dakota, she's trying to overturn I don't know if she's succeeded yet, but she's been working at overturning the voter decision to legalize marijuana. The Idaho
Yeah,
Senate.
I think thankfully that failed, is what I heard. But yeah, she did try to have the courts overrule the vote of the people to legalize medical and adult use cannabis.
Yeah, and then in Idaho, the Republican Senate uh, authorized a constitutional amendment to ban marijuana. The Kentucky Senate just passed a bill to arrest that allows cops to arrest people for insulting them. So there's all these things, and then there's also the issues. If you're a libertarian who cares a lot about like free trade or about immigration reform, or if you're a libertarian who isn't 100% pro-life, if you're a libertarian who cares about a lot of issues, the Republicans are like diametrically opposed, and they're not getting any better on those. Like I'll grant to you, they're getting better on war, sort of, and they're sort of getting better on criminal justice reform, and they're starting to care less about drugs. But on a lot of these other issues, some of them they're getting worse, like protectionism. They're getting worse on. Like I feel like they were better on that 10 years ago. Even immigration, I feel like they were better on that 10 years ago. So if you're a really right-leaning libertarian who, just cares about taxes and gun rights and, I don't know what else. I guess just taxes and gun rights, then I can understand like, oh yeah, the Republican Party is where I want to go. But it doesn't seem like it's a consistent trend in the right direction. And the overwhelming narrative from people who are libertarians in the Republican Party is that the Republican Party is moving toward liberty. And I see them getting questionably better on like 2 or 3 issues, but on other issues, they're actually getting worse. And it's not just the politicians, it's the voters too. Like I grew up as a Republican. I know most of my friends are Republicans. And the whole idea of like, well, if you're not doing anything wrong, then you don't need to worry about getting caught. Like that's still very prevalent. And somehow they get upset when a lockdown happens. And I'm like, whoa, whoa, whoa. Oh, wait a second. Like when I was saying this about the Patriot Act or about immigration reform, you were just saying, hey, as long as you're not doing anything wrong, you don't have anything to worry about. But now that the government is spying on you or making sure that you're doing what you're supposed to do, now you're upset about it. And they still can't see the irony. They're not softening on any of these other issues.
Yeah. So I guess 2 points I would make there. One, I think we should kind of differentiate between kind of like, well, I guess I want to question again, what is the Republican Party? What are Republicans? You could point to Dick Cheney and say Dick Cheney wants to bomb people and fight endless wars. How can you be in the same party as Dick Cheney? By being in the same party as him, you're endorsing all these things. And I would say no. Dick Cheney is who I want to get rid of. This is who I want to displace. What I'm advocating for is not allying with the Republican establishment. What I'm advocating for is a form of grand theft auto, and that the Republican Party is a vehicle. They are in the driver's seat on it. And I'm saying that we can take that vehicle away from them, and we can work to put folks who, in a broad coalition of folks who believe in liberty, we can put the liberty agenda more in the driver's seat there. So that's one thing I want to say there. So everything you say about the governor of, was it Nebraska or wherever that was? I saw that same video. I cringed as I saw it. He's out there with the sign. It's like safer Sam, like safer approaches for marijuana, which is a ridiculous organization I've been fighting like every step along the way in Maine as I work to help legalize adult use cannabis and expand medical cannabis. So he's certainly on that issue. I would say he is someone who is no friend of mine. And I would say that just because I'm advocating for working through the Republican Party and advocating that it is the most effective vehicle available to us, that actually means that many of the folks in positions of leadership on the party are they're more our enemies than many of the Democrats are. They're the ones most immediately in our way. They're the ones who we have to overcome and displace and get rid of. By get rid of, I mean, unelecting them, challenging them. And so that's the first thing I want to say. The other thing I think that needs to be noted is, the sad truth of politics is that, as I see it, the single greatest force in politics is not principle, it's tribalism. It is our team versus the other team. And I wish it was different. I wish that voters came at their decisions of who they're going to vote for various offices by having firm convictions on, an understanding of constitutional government, or even just firm convictions on things I disagree with, but a set of, a form of principled decision making.
Right.
But that's not really how we're weird, because at least Reed, I assume, is a libertarian person. That's kind of, how you tend to evaluate things. It's how I tend to evaluate things. But we're weird.
Yeah.
Most people aren't like that. And if we want to deal with kind of the ugly and messy political reality is what it is, we need to recognize that tribalism is an incredibly powerful force. And we saw this at work with Donald Trump. How has so much of the Republican base gone from being folks who were adamantly, Ron Paul should not be in the Republican Party. He is because he's against the wars, and how dare he question George W. Bush? How dare he question Dick Cheney? How dare he, oppose the war in Iraq and everything else, to going to wanting to drum Liz Cheney out of the party and wanting to at least expressly end the wars in Afghanistan and other places across the world. I wish I could say it was some conversion of principle, but I think, as you hit on, it's not really. For some people it is. For some people, they've had a genuine kind of awakening and a realization, like I had in 2010, where I kind of realized the neoconservative philosophy was a corrupt and bankrupt philosophy, and I became a libertarian. But for most people, it's tribal politics. It's our tribal leader, Donald Trump, says, get out of Afghanistan, and says Bush and all these folks are bad. And so he's right, and we're going to follow our leader. And all of a sudden, a lot of the Democrats who were against the wars when they were George W. Bush's wars are now suddenly saying, how dare Trump try to get us out of Syria and Afghanistan and Iraq, because Orange Man bad, and we're going to be against whatever he's for. And sadly, that is the state of sadly, it's human nature. I think we are tribal creatures. That's how we've evolved. We're always looking for the other to be against and rallying together with our tribe to oppose them. And that's politics today, red versus blue. But understanding that, if we want to put liberty in position to be able to win elections, we have to grapple with the reality as it is. And right now, the reality as it is Joe Biden is president. He has surrounded himself with the neoconservative George W. Bush kind of foreign policy team. The neoconservatives are the Democrat Party now. And this presents a great opportunity for all these people who know that they are opposed to Joe Biden, but don't know why. I mean, what movement is better to spell out all the reasons why Joe Biden is terrible and why we should do something different than the liberty movement? I mean, Joe Biden is the worst of everything. He is a neoconservative who is also a corporate socialist. He is everything that we are against. And so we are better than the neoconservatives still remaining in the GOP. I would argue even better than the kind of the whatever you want to call it, the alt-right or the Trump movement, whatever you want to call it. I would say we are in a better position to provide an actual ideological framework that will give people conviction and confidence in how to oppose this new administration. It can help us bring a lot of new people to the liberty movement, many who will have genuine kind of conversions of principle, like perhaps you and I had. But it's also knowing that there is going to be a tribalist backlash against the Biden administration, particularly in the upcoming 2022 midterm elections. I think that we need to do everything we can now to ride that wave in with liberty people in races for office in the Republican Party.
Yeah, so the only critique I have, or not the only, but the big critique I have there is, if we look at what Ron Paul did, he did not pretend to be a friend of George W. Bush at all, right? Or of Obama. Like, he had his own message that they both are evil, they both suck. What I see the liberty movement trying to do is somehow excuse everything terrible that Trump did. You know, Trump was bad, like even on a bell curve, like he wasn't the worst. You know, I mean, there are so many unhinged conspiracy theories about the dictator that he wasn't, but he was really bad. Like, he increased spending a lot. He reauthorized the Patriot Act. He, amplified the genocide going on in Yemen. So in my opinion, we are better positioned to run someone who can truly bring the liberty message from a more neutral standpoint, because everyone who, was a Ron Paul supporter who is trying to go at it in the Republican Party, they're just trying to excuse so much of what Trump did. Rand Paul does this all the time. Like, he's not willing to call out Trump for the war criminal that he was. I mean, it was funny sometimes because he'd be opposing his legislation in the Senate and then going on TV and telling us what a great president he was and that he was ending the wars or whatever. Like, this is why I love Dave Smith so much, is he just tells it how it is. He talks about all the horrible things Trump did, all the horrible things that Biden is doing and will do. And, Justin Amash too. Like, I think he has some Trump derangement syndrome, but he has been willing to call it how it is. Like, he called out Trump for all the horrible stuff he did, and he's continuously calling out Biden. Rand Paul didn't do that. Thomas Massie didn't really do that. He was a little better than Rand, but he still didn't do it. And I don't see anyone who's trying to get into the Republican Party and awaken that message of liberty doing it either. So that's probably one of the biggest reasons that I think the Libertarian Party is the only way to go, because it seems like it's the only place that we can have that Ron Paulian message of truth that doesn't pander to either side. And I'd love to be proven wrong. Like, a lot of people are talking about DeSantis running, but in my mind, like, he's going to be running in a Trump mold, not a Ron Paul mode. Like, if he runs, he's going to be, trying to continue the message that Trump had, which is at best a very watered down right-leaning version of what we stand for. So do you think someone who truly has a Ron Paul libertarian principled message that isn't bending the knee to either side can actually bring a message to the Republican Party and also, also bring support for down ballot people who also stand for an unabashed message of liberty? That would be my question.
Yeah. So I guess here's the thing I would say: the more activists we have from the liberty movement in the Republican Party, the more effective we're going to be to win things in the Republican Party, change the Republican Party. And I will say this: Trump. I agree with everything you say in the ways that Trump was. He's no standard bearer for our movement.
Right.
And I believe that it is time for the Republican Party to move on from Trump. But also, I think it should be recognized some of the valuable things that he did, maybe unintentionally, but he did wake a lot of people up to some of the real problems that our country faces. Now, he rarely had the right answers for those problems. But because of Trump, people are now aware that there is basically an unelected, almost branch of our government that seems to have more control over the decisions, the policy decisions of our government than anyone that we elect. People are aware now that you have these intelligence agencies that are supposed to be accountable to the elected president, and yet they, for 4 years, were in active war against the president. They're supposed to be accountable to Congress, and yet they've actively spied on Congress. It kind of raises the question: who in the world are these folks accountable to if they can actively kind of wage political warfare against the people that we elect? So I guess what I would say is, because of the Trump moment and the Trump era, and to be clear, I voted for Rand Paul. I was Rand Paul's state chair in Maine, and I think that we would be in a better place today if Republicans had the wisdom to nominate Rand Paul in 2016 instead of Donald Trump. Still, I think that for all of the the reasons, all the reasons that Donald Trump is problematic aside, the Republican Party is in a better place today than it was under the neoconservative movement in the immediate aftermath of 9/11. And that this sets us up for a better opportunity. Like the Republican Party can transition to any number of places right now. The Republican Party can transition back to neoconservative control. God knows the neoconservatives and Liz Cheney are trying to assert control over this party again. That's why they spent so much money to keep me out of Congress, and other liberty champions like Nick Freitas and Matt Gertler, who are running for Congress this past cycle. It could also spin into kind of a more increasingly alt-right nationalist, bordering on fascist, party. That would be a very dangerous direction for us to go, and that's possible. But it can also become a much more liberty party. It probably will never be a pure libertarian party. Probably the best possible future for the Republican Party is more of a kind of economic, constitutionalist, kind of Tea Party-esque kind of party, if we can get back on that track. But the opportunity for that is going to be, what direction we go is going to be defined by who is the strongest opposition movement in the party to the Joe Biden administration over the next 4 years. And so I think if we surrender that opportunity, if we don't participate in the upcoming Republican Civil War, we are going to be surrendering this very powerful political institution to either the neoconservative movement or to this growing kind of alt-right movement. And I think we can be as pure as we want to be, and I'm all for maintaining message purity, but we can be as pure as we want to be in the Libertarian Party. And to be clear, I have many good friends in the liberty movement who are doing great things, who are Libertarian Party members. I have nothing against them. I'm for anyone who is getting out from behind the keyboard and going out in the world and doing real things to advance liberty. But I would say that if our goal is to actually win the future of the country as far as practical political elections and practical policy reformation, um, the Republican Party is the best vehicle available to us under the system as it is right now.
All right. Well, I want to thank you for coming on, Eric. I will admit that I have some animosity toward the GOP. I'm kind of like
Me too.
I'm kind of like, the Bernie supporters who hate the Democrats. That's kind of who I am for the
Yeah.
Republicans. So I will admit that I do have some prejudice there. But you're the only
And
guy.
again, if we want to take out our enemies in the Republican Party, the best place to do it is from inside the Republican Party.
Yeah, so we're not going to agree there, but that's fine. But I just want to say thank you for coming on. You're the only guy who, don't take this term the wrong way, is a GOP apologist, meaning thinking not that you support everything the GOP does, but that you think the GOP is the way to go. You're the only guy who's been willing to come on the show and make the case. So thank you for that. And I wish you luck. I mean, I don't, just like you said, you don't care how it happens. I just care that it happens. So I hope in Maine that the way you're approaching it is successful. And I'll just give you the last word.
Well, hey, Reed, it's been a pleasure having the conversation with you. Again, I just want to say to everyone who is in our movement, the liberty movement is bigger than any political party. And what's more important is our shared principles, and that everyone is doing everything they can in the best way that they know how to advance the cause. Whether you choose to advance the cause through the LP or the GOP, or maybe you're a Liberty Democrat trying to advance it somehow through that god awful party over there, or maybe you're a voluntarist who doesn't get involved in politics whatsoever and thinks we're gonna save the world by just going off the grid and or supporting Bitcoin. I think there's value in that approach as well. I think that there is always, in a movement like ours that is so based on individualism and free thought, there is a tendency for infighting and people. If we have strategic disagreements, we can often be very quick to say someone is our enemy or someone is not a real libertarian. But I just want to say to everyone out there, if you believe in liberty, if you believe in these principles, I'm proud to be in this movement with you. No matter your strategy, no matter your approach, I'm going to argue for the strategy I think most effective, which is primarily using the Republican Party as a vehicle, getting people elected to state legislatures, fighting back against state tyranny, and nullifying unconstitutional federal laws. If you believe that there's value in that approach, I would welcome you to join me in this. You can find me on Twitter at Senator Eric, Senator Brakey. You can also learn more about Young Americans for Liberty. And I should say, when I'm advocating for the GOP, that's not an official position of Young Americans for Liberty. Young Americans for Liberty is a nonpartisan organization. We've actually, Young Americans for Liberty has spent more money to support LP candidates for state legislature than any other organization in the country, including the Libertarian Party. And in fact, we helped get the first Libertarian Party candidate elected to the state legislature. Has been elected in the last quarter century. His name is Marshall Burt in Wyoming, and he's doing good work out there. So ultimately, I'm an advocate for using the best vehicle available to win, to make liberty win. That's what's most important. If you'd like to learn more about Young Americans for Liberty, I would encourage you to go to yaliberty.org. And if you'd like to join our growing army of liberty activists who are helping to get liberty candidates elected to state legislatures across the country through Operation Win at the Door and get paid to do it, then be sure to sign up and apply on the website.
All right. Well, I will put a link in the description to your Twitter page and to Young Americans for Liberty. Thank you, Eric, for coming on.
Thank you, Reed. It's a pleasure talking with you.